right, ladies, Alicia, Bertine, I can't believe we eventually made it. And it's a different story how long it took us to actually get together today. But thank you so very much for you to be my guests this morning on the Operational Excellence Show. And I would like you to introduce yourself to the audience, because the three of us, we have had a brilliant year together in the world of business, working together in diversity and equality and inclusion, and working together and walking together in the shoes of optimizing technology, make your business sleek and work. So I start with you first, Alicia. Welcome.
Oh, no pressure. Well, first, thank you so much for having me on your show again. This is such an honor. And for your listeners, I'm Alicia Butler Pierre, and I am the founder and CEO of Equilibria, and it's an operations management firm. And we specialize in creating business infrastructure to support fast-growing businesses as they are scaling, so that they can scale with less pain. So that's what we do.
Brilliant. And now, Berthine, how do you fit into this? Tell us.
Hello, Marianne. Hello, Alicia. Thank you for having me back on the show as well. I'm super excited to be here. And so hello to all of your listeners. My name is Bertine Crèvecoeur West, and I am the CEO of a company called Westbridge Solutions. We're a management consulting firm that specializes in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that includes soft skills training as well as linguistic access.
Excellent. Welcome. So we have just had another year of total disruption. Everybody can probably agree to that.
Yes.
And our clients collectively, they had probably two issues. They didn't know how to address challenges around home working, family, working hours in the office versus at home. Which goes into your field, Berthine. I recently read an article that the BBC wrote that clearly said the women are disadvantaged in the home working scenario. And I thought, well, it's probably something true, because you still try to run your household, your family, whatever else. And the other piece, and that ties into you, Alicia, over the last 12 months, that so many software companies have popped up, and people think, how on earth do I organize my business? How do I make sure nothing falls through the cracks? And because we work all from home, it seems instead of working 7.5, 8, or make it 9 or 10 hours, we seem to be working 16 hours, thinking, running our household, and do the work. Bertine, you are nodding.
Yes, because, and I was having this discussion in my household because there was a report that did come out that I was paying attention to on television, and I was just like, oh, breaking news, right? Women have been doing this, working as, we've been working professionally and personally, and the personal part is the unpaid labor, right? Whatever we might be doing at home. Whether you're, a fur parent, a human parent, or, you're just managing your household, right? So it spreads across the gamut. So we are not being compensated for those extra hours. And what that does is it can take us in two directions. It can cause us to become overwhelmed, which is what most of us go through in the beginning. And then it can, if we find, and this is where Alicia, I think her work is just phenomenal and groundbreaking, because it does spill over into my personal life. And so we have to create boundaries and set limits, for ourselves and those around us, who love and support us, as well as our clients. And I find that when we're able to create those boundaries, people rise to the occasion. Everyone wants you to be at your best. And the only way you can do that is really to do what they tell you when you're on a flight. You have to put your oxygen mask on first, and that requires data and a process.
Yes, and that's your pointer, right, Alicia? Put on your oxygen mask, otherwise you're gonna die, literally and figuratively speaking. Yeah.
Yes, and having that process, but I'd like to just kind of piggyback off of what you and Bertine were just talking about, having that work-life balance, if there is such a thing right now, especially during COVID. I don't know about you ladies, but it definitely took a toll on me. And what's interesting is that I always worked from home. That was nothing new for me, but I think the difference when COVID came on the scene is that there was no escape from home. It wasn't as if I wasn't able to go and sit in a cafe that I might have normally sat in just to be able to get away for maybe an hour or two. I can't go to meet people for lunch. I can't go to networking events. Everything is done from home and there's no relief. And so it starts to take a toll on your mental health as well as your physical health. And I just wish that more people were open about that, because I'll be honest with both of you, I really struggled, mentally as well as with physical health. And then there's always that fear factor, I don't want to go to the doctor's office, or I don't want to go to the hospital because I may catch COVID if I go to those places. Those are places where people are sick, and I don't want to get sick trying to go and basically invest in self-care. But circling back to the process piece, processes are probably more important than ever now. And what I can say, if there's a silver lining to this dark COVID cloud, it's that more and more people are starting to become interested in this thing called supply chain management. Who would have ever thought that supply chain would make the front page of so many newspapers around the world? But we all now have a much more vested interest in what that is, and just understanding how things flow. Yes. And as we start to understand that at a macro level, we can then start to try to figure out, as Bertine was hinting at, how do we look at how work and information flows in our homes at a micro level? Yeah. And so that process piece is definitely important.
And you're right on the dot here, Alicia. When that then comes into caring about your customers and not offering an excellent customer service, which is what I really do every day, all day. Now, if customer service does not understand the challenge of the supply chain, for example, the cargo that never came in, or the lorry driver that never got his load, or let's say the delivery driver that couldn't find the house, then that creates so much frustration at the end of the customer's end, who is waiting excitedly for his goods, whatever he ordered, or the service he ordered, and it all falls over. And there is, I want to make a link here into Bertine's area of expertise. Bertine, you know, in this whole supply piece, there's also this issue with energy, right? I mean, in the UK, energy firms just collapse. Every single day an energy firm collapses because the price goes up. The day before yesterday, and we are recording this mid-January, there was an energy firm that in all seriousness put out, if you want to save money in energy, put on a jumper, eat porridge, or cuddle with a cat. Seriously. What does a DEI specialist say to that? I nearly died.
Once I stop gasping from laughter, I will say these are transformational times. And to that end, my first thought was, well, that's inequitable, because what if you have an allergy to a cat? Just
exactly
on the face of it, right? I think it's really important for companies to think about, and again, this goes back to data, knowing your customer, right? It's really important to think about who's receiving these services and in what capacity are they receiving these services, and how is it, because not everyone needs everything, right? With regard to a jumper, maybe a better description, if I were advising them on such things, would have been to say in the United States, I remember this when I was a child. We were told, there were commercials told to where people were telling us to put on a sweater and turn down the thermostat, right? That is something that I think would have been a much more prudent response to that, right? With regard to their messaging. Grab your cozy blanket. There are ways to make things sound better and be better so we can all do better. One of the things that I would say with regard to DEI, again, and building community and inclusive experiences is to remind the customer that these are challenging times, and let's show one another grace. So to that end, maybe we should all try to conserve as much energy as possible. Here are some helpful tips, because we want to tell people, not only what to do, but how to do it. Once people have information, we empower them. I can't just grab a random cat. The cat wouldn't like it either. So I think with regard to that, there is an aspect of equity and inclusiveness that plays a part in every part of our lives, right? To that extent, with regard to an energy commercial, there's a better way to do it.
And what does that do for you, Alicia? You probably think, hang on a second, somebody didn't do any quality control here, right?
Right, lack of quality control. But I think what the piece that Bertine mentioned about the messaging, and just making sure that you don't, how many times have we heard of these customers who have these faux pas where they put out these marketing campaigns, for example, and it ends up being tone deaf. But definitely embedding I'm glad you mentioned that, Mariana, is embedding those quality control, quality assurance checkpoints in your process. And especially on the customer support, customer service side of things, because those are the people who have direct interaction with your clients or your customers or your personnel. And you have to make sure they're educated, as Bertine was just saying. So one thing that's been very interesting to me also ever since COVID has come onto the scene is I've heard so many people blame companies of price gorging. And again, they have to, because they don't understand what's happening upstream of a company's supply chain. They don't understand the taxing toll, I guess you could say, that it's placing on that particular company, and how that company has no choice but to kind of raise their prices and pass that increase onto the customer. So again, that education piece, the quality control, quality assurance, those are all so, so important, especially during times like these.
And that ties back into you, Bertine, because what Alicia just mentioned is, companies have to increase their prices. What can a firm do to help their, let's say, customer service people who will get calls? Because guess what? The customer doesn't want to pay an extra 5p for a loaf of bread. But, flour is getting more and more expensive, so therefore it needs to be passed on, or the bakery has to close. There's not two ways about it. So what can a company do with their customer service department to get the advisor and the individual to a level where they can comfortably and competently talk to an upset customer about price increases, for example?
Well, again, I feel like I'm dressed inappropriately for this because I should have worn my I Love Data t-shirt. Because it all goes back to transparency and the dissemination of information and the manner in which we disseminate said information. So again, the first thing that we have to do is remind the customer, because we can't expect customers to act other than a human way, right? Customers are human beings. And so you're going to think about your problem that you're facing immediately, right? The seller is the same thing, right? They're going to think about the problem they're facing immediately. And those two problems, while they fall under the COVID umbrella, the two entities, the customer and the vendor, or the company, are going to be experiencing the problem in different ways, right? So the customer is going to have to pay more, the vendor is dealing with supply chain issues. And so what I think is always important is to educate the customer about their process, right? About what they're having to experience. And also to your point, Marianne, you mentioned that the bakery will go out of business. So one thing I think is great is signage, because that's where you can, provide the messaging before the customer even comes into the store. Email, for those that receive email, let them know that, again, these are challenging times and we want to continue to serve you in the best way possible. But to do so and to remain open, we have to increase our prices. And that's across the board. For us in the service industry, a price increase is the natural tendency, particularly during these times. So when the customer isn't surprised, right, when they receive this information in bits and pieces, then they'll come to expect it. And I think it's the surprise that really throws people off, right? You can't just walk in, oh, okay, bread was, a dollar, a US dollar one day, and then it's $5 the next day, no warning, nothing like that, right? We need to receive this information prior to even stepping foot into the bakery, even if that's at the bakery door with a little sign. As long as we keep people aware of these changes, I believe that we find they'll respond in a much more positive light, because no one wants their favorite bakery to close, right? Everybody wants bread there, right? So why not do our part, to help that bakery stay open, which means an extra sacrifice. To that end, when we go, when we could go to dinner before Omicron, we would tip more, because we understand that, if we want to keep, patronizing this place and keeping it open, that requires effort on our part as the consumer, right? So what that means is we might go out to dinner less, but when we do go, we are supporting that restaurant, that, eatery. And we all have to play a part in this if we're going to thrive and come out of this better than we were before.
And here is the thing, Alicia, right? If our clients do not have a process, a framework to communicate, guess what happens? You get a lot of work because it all falls over.
And, what Bertine just said was just so brilliant. So the earlier and the sooner that you can start getting that messaging out there, the better, obviously, because it prevents panic.
Yeah.
It also prevents or hopefully minimizes misinformation. The CDC could have benefited from hiring both of you when COVID was, when the COVID outbreak first happened, because look at what happened. There was so much misinformation. It led to all of these conspiracy theories. Now, around the world, we have people who, not to get controversial or political here, but who have certain ideas about certain things, vaccinations, for example, and some of that may very well be rooted just in the misinformation. And because that was so mishandled from the very beginning, I really believe that's why we're in the state that we're in today. The other piece is I realize it's really early in the morning for me, so forgive me. I realized I said price gorging and not gouging, so I wanted to make sure that I acknowledged that.
I think we all understood that, but I liked your reference point you just made. Although in hindsight, we know we had situations like these before, earlier in the 20th century, for example. What did not work was the execution of a solid business continuity plan.
Yes.
What do you do if your business is under threat? And that's what happened. It wasn't, and I don't want to belittle that, it wasn't just their lives that were all of a sudden under threat. The whole way of running your day and running your business completely got challenged, starting with hospital admissions and ending with people not being able to go to the store. So this just illustrates really beautifully how important the business continuity planning is, which again is process. And believe me, anyone I speak to first about BCP, and you probably both have seen that, they just go, oh no, don't talk to me about it. I absolutely hate it. I'm not even sure we have one. Never mind, we tested it. Do you see that?
I say that all the time. There is no plan.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
no one wants to have that. It's almost, it's very much akin to having to sit down and write your living will and trust.
Yeah. Yeah.
It makes people uneasy thinking about what could go wrong.
Yes.
But it's to your benefit. What would happen if, in the event of a theft, a fire, a flood, all of these natural disasters that are happening around the world? How does your company recover? How do you continue to service your customers in the event of a catastrophic disaster? Those are the types of things that you have to start thinking through. And it's better to think through as many of those scenarios up front than to have to be in reactive mode once something like that does happen. Now, the one thing that to not be too hard on so many companies, the one thing that I'll say many of us did not think of before was the pandemic.
Yeah.
Now, there were companies who did think of, well, okay, if there is a really bad earthquake or a terrible snowstorm or a hurricane, we know what we need to do. If we have a cybersecurity breach of some sort, we have a rough idea of what we need to do. But I don't think many organizations even thought about what could happen in the event of a pandemic, because it's, to your point, Mariana, it's something that happened, the last major pandemic was decades ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more, actually. I feel that having a BCP, like you both have mentioned, it's akin to, your last will and testament, right? Because no one wants to think about what they feel is the inevitable, and that's that looming fear, right? I think it's a looming fear, and no one wants to speak about their own mortality or confront it, and that happens with their companies.
Yes.
To your point, within a BCP, there needs to be a strategic diversity plan, because what is happening now is that we're all working virtually, or most of us are virtually. We're managing diverse teams that are in different time zones, that may be limited English proficiency speakers, that require different accommodations. We have to think about our visually impaired and our deaf and our hard of hearing communities. What are we doing within that BCP to address these diverse communities? We have to think about people who are caregivers at home. We have to think about and now, because of just the way living has become, we have people who are working, who are taking care of their children and their parents, all within the same house, right? We have to think about, what does that mean? What does it look like? What about mental health days? What does all of that, how does all of that fit into a BCP? And so when we are able to sit down and really flesh that out, and this is why, I'm a fan of Alicia's, and she knows this, because what she does is so very important. She literally, first, she has the best visuals, which I'm always a fan of.
Yeah, I'm a fan of that too.
I'm a visual learner, and I'm like, okay, acronym, there are pictures, this works for me, right? But she literally gives people a plan, people in organizations, a plan on the steps it takes. So going back to what we were saying about customer messaging, right? Incrementally increasing the bits of data that they receive so they can respond, proactively instead of reactively. These are steps that we need to consider in a BCP. And that's why I always say there is a strategic imperative, a business imperative for diversity, equity, and inclusion within not only the existence of a company, but the survivability of that company.
Yes, absolutely. So, Alicia, if you had to give your clients one tip where to start with the BCP, what would that be, and how would you help them? And then the same question goes to Berthine.
I would say start with the template, and I'm more than happy to share one with you, Mariana, that you can share with your audience.
Yeah.
That's always a great place to start, because it can be difficult to sit down and try to come up with something from scratch. So there are so many templates that are out there online that people are offering for free. I have one that I also offer for free. And it just, if nothing else, it's a guide, and it gets you thinking about certain things and kind of helps get the ball rolling for you and different people on your team to start thinking through these different scenarios and how you would react in the event one of these things does take place. But the documentation, this is the other one really quick thing. I know you asked for one tip.
No, that's agreed. I'm glad you mentioned it. So yeah.
So we've been talking about messaging. We've been talking about the need to act, or to be proactive, I should say. The documentation piece. Not all of us learn the same way. I'm also a visual learner, so that's why I'm always putting together these visual aids to communicate the information. Whether it's a short video that you record on your phone, whether it's something that you put up on Instagram, if it's something that you put into Dropbox, Google Drive, whatever you need to communicate to your customers, make sure that information is documented. Make sure people can access it. Your customer support teams can access that information, and constantly revisit that information to make sure all of the information is accurate. In times like these, it's not uncommon for something to literally change on a daily basis. So make sure you have that it goes back to that quality control and quality assurance checkpoints that we were talking about earlier. Embed that into your process, and that will go a very long way in making sure that you keep your customers happy.
Absolutely. And if people want to connect with you, Alicia, where do they do that?
The best way is through my company, and that website is eqbsystems.com.
We will put that into the show notes. Bertine, if you had an opportunity to, if you have this opportunity to tell companies what they should be considering first and foremost to not fall into this trap of not being inclusive and not respecting the diversity, what would that be?
Well, one of my favorite quotes is from Socrates, and he stated, "Know thyself," right?
Yes.
From a company standpoint, an organizational standpoint, knowing thyself means knowing your team, right? And it could be 2 people, it could be 200,000 people. One thing I really, really strongly believe in with regard to data-driven diversity strategic efforts is assessments. Assessments matter, because then you'll get to know what your team is thinking, and specifically with regard to assessments, a diversity, equity, and inclusion climate assessment. And that is something that is double blind, meaning that you're providing psychological safety for those taking it, because there won't be any repercussions. People answer honestly because they're worried that this might affect them later on. If they said something that, their employers or the C-suite might not like, but these double-blind assessments, it's really important, or double anonymous assessments, I should say. It's really important that you understand how your employees feel about the diversity and inclusion efforts that your company might be undertaking, wherever you are in that DEI maturity cycle. This will allow you to craft, again, proactive strategies, and this will allow you to get really a temperature of how your employees feel you're responsive to their particular needs. And, with regard to this, you can measure anywhere from 1 to 50 criteria. This is something that we do and we love to do, because it gives you an honest picture of your company's health, right? And how are we going to move forward? If we don't go to our annual visits at the doctor, how do we know how healthy we actually are? And how can we then take steps to improve our health if that's what we need to do, right? And most of us do. So I would always say, start out with a DEI climate assessment to gauge how your employees are feeling about their presence and their value in your organization.
And if our listeners want to connect with you and find out how this can be done, professionally, easily, very competently, where can people find you, Bertine?
They can definitely visit our website. It's westgrouptraining.com, or where I love to live and play, LinkedIn. It's Bertine Crèvecoeur West. That's the fastest way to get my attention.
Brilliant. And we'll put all of these into show notes on wherever we're going to publish this conversation. From the bottom of my heart, ladies, thank you so very much for taking the time. It's always a pleasure to have you, to speak with you individually, to have you on one call as one, as together is really just amazing. Thank you so very much. And yes, I'm sure we have a brilliant year ahead with a lot of collaboration, which is something, again, that I believe women do particularly well. They collaborate, they share the knowledge with the one goal. If somebody else can just learn something that helps them to move forward in their business life and in their organization, then that's what we do. It was brilliant to have you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.